my name is Claire Benson, and I am your advisor today. And I'm also actually a co-director of a company called SDG Changemakers. And we're a sustainability consultancy helping SMEs to understand, embed and measure their sustainability activities, and also to understand how to develop a new sustainable business model. So what we're going to cover today are areas around broad range in basically in order to sort of put digital waste into context and try and help people think more laterally about how we do that. So we're going to cover the context of sustainability. We're going to think about what sustainability actually means. How can an SME become more sustainable? Understand more about what digital waste is, and then have a look at some top 10 tips to reduce that digital waste. So we've all seen images like these ones regarding plastic pollution in our beaches and on the oceans, the awful fires raging across Australia, Europe and America, and also obviously the melting ice caps and the impact it's having on the natural world. The latest head news lines are also focused on this looming crisis as well around energy. And we all know that COP26 is happening in November. And phrases like net zero, carbon neutral and greenhouse gases are part of our everyday lexicon. So while sustainability has been bubbling away for many years, the climate space and sustainable development has become the topic of 2021. It's certainly on top of the agenda for governments, boardrooms, senior leaders, consumers and employers. And from a climate point of view, while we do have a target, while we're actually in crisis, there is a target, and this was set out in the Paris Agreement in December 2015. So I'm not sure if many of you know about the Paris Agreement, but it's a legally binding international treaty on climate change. It's actually adopted by all 196 nations at COP21. And the agreement sets out a global framework to avoid dangerous climate change by limiting global warming. And the ideal limit, as we all know, is 1.5 degrees Celsius. So climate is one of the 17 wider challenges we actually all face when talking about adopting sustainability development practices in order to act sustainably and make responsible business decisions. So as I said, there's actually 17 of these global sustainable development goals, and we'll try and explore them a little bit more shortly in relation to what we're talking about today, which is digital waste. So what does it mean to be sustainable? And many people talk about sustainability, but don't really understand what the full gamut of sustainability is. So to try and frame this webinar about digital waste, it's useful to understand what it means. So sustainability is most often defined as meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet theirs. So it's got three main pillars, which is all economic, environmental and social. And that's rooted in the theory of triple bottom line accounting, which some of you may have heard of. This supports the green economy, which is defined as being low carbon, resource efficient and socially inclusive. So it's really important that we have all those three elements that come together. In a green economy, growth in employment and income are driven by public and private investment into local economic activities, the infrastructure and assets that enable reduced carbon emissions and pollution. So enhancing that energy and resource efficiency and preventing further loss of biodiversity and ecosystems. The green economy does provide a macroeconomic approach to sustainable growth with a central focus on investments, employment and skills, but it's really important to understand that context when we think about the micro aspect in terms of SMEs. Now, Ben and Simon, have you ever heard of the triple bottom line before? Yeah.
I've not, no.
You've not. So, Simon, for you, if you're looking at CIC, investigating triple bottom line is probably a really good idea, as that will help to define how you're actually going to report back on the activities that you're going to do with your CIC. Ben, I'm not sure what your business is, but if you want to sort of drop in a comment about that, that'd be really great, and we can try and sort of contextualize this webinar for you as well. So to give some background about these Sustainable Development Goals that I've been talking about, we're actually in something called the Decade of Action. So that means that we have got, now we're in 2021, we've got 9 or 8.5 years in order to try and meet the Sustainable Development Goals. The 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development was a historic global agreement to leave no one behind. And certainly here in the UK, we hear this phrase an awful lot as we recover from the COVID-19 pandemic. It was agreed to by the world leaders at the UN in 2015. And these goals succeed the Millennium Development Goals. Now, the Millennium Development Goals were focused on developing countries. And they realized that actually, in order for us to meet the global challenges, the goals had to be applicable to all countries, not just in the developing world. So these SDGs, the full 17, are universal, with all the signatories expected to contribute to them internationally and deliver them domestically. The UK was actually the forefront of negotiating the SDGs, and the UK government has recently updated their commitment, and you can find their commitment on the government website if you search Sustainable Development Goals. So essentially, these goals are the global strategic framework to help solve the global challenges we all face, such as climate change, such as reducing inequalities and promoting responsible consumption and production, which is key in terms of digital waste. So as you can see, these goals, they cover things like no poverty, zero hunger, health and well-being, quality education, gender, clean water, affordable energy, decent work for everyone, innovation, reducing inequalities, sustainable cities and communities, which is incredibly important in this day and age, and certainly where digital comes into play, responsible consumption and production, climate action, life below water, life on land, and then it talks about peace and strong institutions and working as partners together in order to actually achieve these goals. So the role of SMEs. Sometimes when we look at the Sustainable Development Goals and we look at how we can contribute to climate change and make positive contributions, it can be a little bit difficult how actual SMEs can be part of that. But I think the one thing that we all need to remember is that SMEs are crucially important to the health and stability of our global economy. They account for 95% of all businesses across the globe, and the majority of private sector gross domestic product, so GDP, wealth and employment creation. And importantly, SMEs have such a positive impact on social and environmental issues too. So the SMEs themselves have a really key leading role to play in meeting what we call the economic focused SDGs, such as promoting inclusive and sustainable economic growth, employment and decent work for all, as well as what I've mentioned, promoting that sustainable industrialization and fostering innovation. In fact, SMEs are seen as the vanguard of innovation and core to inclusive economic and growth. Innovative SMEs are much more productive SMEs and certainly can pay better wages, offer better working conditions to the workers, thus helping to reduce that inequality, which, as I said, fits across all countries across the globe, as well as being innovators to actually transform to a green economy. So what we'll do is we'll have a little look at these ones in more depth and see how they relate to digital waste and what SMEs can actually do. So SDG 9 is all about building a resilient infrastructure, promoting inclusive and sustainable industrialization and fostering innovation. Innovation is stated more often than not as requiring some sort of digital transformation. So by positioning sustainable development at the heart of an ideation stage, this should help businesses to make sustainable choices, such as cloud-based servers, hardware which is made from recycled materials, or moving production process from a linear model to a circular one. Sustainable transport is a really good example, for example. So creating a fast charging car battery has a number of advantages, but not if it's at the expense of consuming vast amounts of energy. So for you, Simon and Ben, it's a great idea to think about innovation within your own business. So Simon, you've already explained that you want to create a CIC. So how thus could you innovate within that CIC to meet some of these goals? SDG 12 is all about ensuring sustainable consumption and production patterns. And here actually electronic waste is explicitly mentioned. Did you know that each person generates about 7.3 kilograms of e-waste, but only 1.7 kilograms were actually recycled? And this is stats dating back to 2019. Within the SDGs, they have a number of targets, and target 12.5 asks that by 2030, all countries have substantially reduced waste generation through prevention, reduction, recycling, and reuse. As individual businesses, we can do our bit to meet these national goals, but we need to educate ourselves first and understand and undertake, for example, an IT and digital waste audit to get the process started. Number 13 is all about taking urgent action to combat climate change and its impacts. And key to this is 13.2, which asks for integration of climate change measures into national policies, strategies and planning. So this is a really important aspect when considering about the regulations and policies that government will be bringing into the country for businesses to actually adhere to. But in simple terms, it means that we need to reduce our energy consumption and reduce our digital waste, which is perfect for you, Simon, understanding your CIC. Does anyone have any questions before I go on further about the SDGs and how they're positioned for SMEs? Okay. So let's take a closer look at digital and IT waste. Did you know that we create an astonishing 50 million tons of it a year? And without urgent action, this could more than double by 2050. Now, interestingly, e-waste is not just limited to all the smart devices that we utilize for our work and within our own homes as well. But it's every thread in the world's digital fabric comes with an environmental cost. From the energy that powers those data centers to the appliances in our homes, in our offices, the equipment in our factories, and importantly, to the data stored in our offices, which is something that we often overlook. In the UK, Bloomberg predicts that by 2030, 90% of all power will come from zero carbon sources, which is great. The digital economy, though, will however require 50% more power by 2030 than it does now, with computing workloads expected to increase 8-fold in the next 9 years. So our data storage needs will increase by a factor of 30, from something like just less than 2,000 million terabytes to 56 million terabytes over the same period, which is an awful lot of data. So as I've already said, SMEs are the drivers of innovation, but this often requires digital transformation, and this comes in the form of hardware, software, the use of big data, AI, and machine learning. So all businesses will have elements of this within their current systems, but also with regards to where they're going to take their products and services forward in the future. So if we take hardware, for example, technology has improved so rapidly in the last few years that today it's very hard to imagine what the world would be like without all our smartphones, GPS maps, laptops, and other electronic devices. At the same time, the skyrocketing amount of used electronics being discarded has left environmental activists, state and local governments, and the UN seriously considering questions about how to reduce e-waste. Fast fact for you. Did you know that now there is more mobile phones around the world than the number of people, and there are 7.5 billion people in the world? So reusing those precious metals and plastics in old cell phones, for instance, instead of mining brand new materials, will certainly help save the energy equivalent to power up 24,000 homes for a year. This is according to estimates by the US Environmental Protection Agency. Obviously, the solution is recycling. So this takes the parts from the electronics, make even the broken ones, and that still have the value, and make them available for any new product. So Simon, you'll be well aware of this. You use a number of recycling agencies already. But we do need to do more as a collective to move ourselves from a linear economy to a circular economy. And we can just talk a little bit what that means in the next slide. So linear versus circular economy. Many of us care about reducing our environmental impact on the planet. So at home and in the office, we diligently sort out all our recycling, avoid single-use plastics where we can, monitor our homes and office using energy smart meters, and use our devices as well to post about the environment on our social media pages. But certainly, you know, do we all consider what happens when that smartphone or tablet reaches the end of its life? We do know that we need to recycle, but I think one of the things that we need to be really aware of and educate ourselves about, and our teams, is that we need to make sure that any of that hazardous e-waste is not impacting on our lives going forward. The other side of it is wondering what happens to all that data we accumulate and how it also impacts the planet. So without a doubt, digital waste is a huge and growing challenge, and we need to find innovative solutions in order to work out how to do this. So researchers and businesses are increasingly intent on creating the circular economy. So it's one that actually decouples economic success from the consumption of finite resources, and that's the really important piece to remember here. By designing waste out of our business operations and transitioning to renewable energy, for instance, we can enjoy our current standards of living and continue that innovation without actually consuming and destroying the world around us. Digital technology has certainly made huge strides in, for instance, reducing waste paper, so increasing efficiency and reducing like unnecessary travel and transport. So while these are all really definite, clear benefits in terms of utilizing digital, digital isn't the entirely green solution we often think about. So getting back to hardware, electronic waste is defined as discarding electrical and electronic devices that can lead to human and environmental damage. As I mentioned before, they can get put in landfills. So these devices contain toxic chemicals like mercury and lead, and while they're incredibly safe to use, once they get placed into landfill, that's where the problems can come into. So as technology evolves and keeps improving, and we keep upgrading, we have created this problem. But we have to remember as well that reducing e-waste isn't just about eliminating those environmental risks. It's also about how we can conserve resources. So when we're thinking about it, talking to our teams, talking to our IT departments, we can be thinking about that environmental risk, but we can also be thinking about what it's actually doing to conserve those finite resources that we have across the globe. So by conserving resources, it helps us reduce the energy, which in turn, if we're recycling those parts, then those parts can be reused into creating new ones. This also has the benefit of actually keeping down the cost of creating new consumer goods, which perhaps we don't always think about. So it's a much less expensive proposition for manufacturers by recycling, reusing, than it is having to go mining for virgin ore. And certainly within the pandemic, we've seen microchips have been in short supply, so forth and so on, because we've not been able to put the effort into mining those resources. due to very many different aspects of COVID-19. So according to the World Economic Forum, 67 countries have enacted legislation relating to e-waste. The UK is one of them, which is great. But unfortunately, enforcement varies widely. So globally, only 20% of e-waste is actually recycled on average. The major device manufacturers have a big role to play by moving towards greater use of renewable and recyclable materials. And in a circular economy, in a circular future, we would hope to see that the components of your old device could be repurposed to build new ones that you produce. This in itself is a piece of innovation that could help in terms of manufacturers creating these products. So the invisible cost of digital life, we often don't think about this at all, but if we turn to software, for example, a prime example of how the digital revolution can remove some forms of waste while replacing it with others is the music industry. So once many years ago, consumers had to go to the store, buy a record or a CD. Now they can just stream it virtually, with so many costly steps in the process actually eliminated. So it seems obvious that digitally distributed music consumes less energy and resources than the old system, but this is not entirely true. Carbon emissions are not necessarily lower in the move from physical cassettes and CDs to streaming music digitally, as it comes with its own cost. For instance, a music video by Despacito set an international record on the internet in April 2018 when it became the first video to hit 5 billion views on YouTube, which is fantastic for the band. But in the process, the band reached a less celebrated milestone, as it burned as much energy as 40,000 US homes use in a year. The other invisible cost of a digital life is our data centers. These data centers are all over the world and they store data on servers. According to a study published in Science, data centers use about 1% of global electricity, something to be really conscious about in the work environment within our offices. So as we sort of drill down a little bit more into everyday life of working within an SME, we need to consider even just sending an email. So every engagement with the digital world creates waste. From the emails we send to the videos we stream, the energy required for just one internet search will result in the emissions of 0.2 grams of carbon. It doesn't sound like much, but an office of 100 people searching 50 terms a day, say, will generate 250 kilos of carbon a year. So as much as digital communication and distribution have allowed us to send content seemingly through thin air, the truth is we need complex machines to do it. As already stated, the World Economic Forum reported that 50 million tons of e-waste are produced each year. And if left unchecked, that would create more than double to 120 million tons by 2050. To try and put that into context, this is equivalent in weight to all the commercial aircraft ever built throughout history, or 4,500 Eiffel Towers, enough to cover the area of Manhattan, for instance. So just looking at something as simple as email, how can SMEs reduce waste from this everyday activity? So what we can do is break email data down into a few segments, so such as unintended waste. So did you know, just adding an extra space in a text, hitting send too early, or attaching the same picture twice is all going to use up energy. Use data. This data has served its purpose and is no longer useful, such as all those emails sitting in your folders and inbox. Do they need to be sat there? Unwanted data is another sector, and this looks at spam. Are all those e-newsletters necessary? Are you monitoring your opening rates for newsletters, for instance? Can you be more targeted and precise? Or is there another way that you could actually communicate with your customers? So from an SME perspective, what could you and your team do to reduce this simple digital waste? Simon, Ben, do you have any ideas or any further thoughts? It's certainly one to think about. One way is, rather than using email to communicate, how about using Teams or Slack? They actually use less energy. The other one, which happens an awful lot in organisations, is lots of people are copied in to an email. Does that really have to happen? How about using an eco-responsible search engine like Ecosa? And what about bookmarks? Using bookmarks can actually avoid duplicating searches. If you're sending content, would lower resolution images and videos work, or even sending audio files? So while the digital transformation of our culture and economy has many benefits, it does come with a number of invisible costs for which we have to budget. It's not that there is no waste, it's that the waste is less visible and less recognisable. But if we start to understand these challenges, it's the first step to actually comprehensive action. On both an individual and an organisational level, we can ensure that the digital transformation is truly a step forward to a more sustainable, circular economy. And it's not just a trade-off of one set of problems for another. Another area to look at is company websites. So collectively, the web accounts for 2% of all greenhouse gas emissions. Again, to put it into perspective, that's equivalent to the global aviation industry, and the same as Germany, the 6th highest polluting country in the world. So every time someone fires up a single web page, it emits 20 milligrams of CO2 per second. So you can imagine, for more complex sites, this can be as much as 300 milligrams. So at the moment, there are approximately 3.5 billion web users worldwide. But with the global population steadily increasing and more people getting access to the internet, whether that is laptops or mobiles, the amount of computers and data centers are set to increase dramatically in order to match this need. So when we're looking at websites themselves, just very simply, some things that organizations can do is to make sure that images are reduced in file size. Be really strategic with videos, not only in the size of the videos, but where they're utilized. Use lazy loading for images and media, for instance. Now, what that actually means is loading images and other media only if it's required. So for those web developers out there, everything above the fold loads instantly when a user lands on the page, but the rest only appears if someone scrolls down. So if a user doesn't scroll all the way to the bottom, then not all the images need to be loaded. You can set up web caching as well. So caching involves downloading shared page elements such as JavaScript, CSS and images, and storing them closer to the user. When the user revisits the page, they can retrieve this data from the cached location rather than querying the web server again. Do an audit of your website and delete what's not needed. And really look at that journey from a customer's point of view and improve that site navigation to make it easier to find core information. It's also a good idea to use a green web host. Now, with servers, data centers, and cooling systems all chewing up electricity, finding a company that employs renewable energy goes a long way to minimizing environmental impact of your website. Admittedly, green web hosting is still finding its feet, so a great opportunity out there for web developers. But you need to find that host that combines solid performance, good customer support, and reuses renewable energy. Many hosting companies also don't operate their own data centers, meaning that they have less control over how those servers are run. So it's really good to do your research into your hosting company too. So I've noted data servers, so might as well sort of have a quick chat about this. Do you know where your data is stored? Reevaluating how data centers are built and maintained can have a huge impact on their sustainability, along with making server farms and data centers, such as in the picture, more efficient. Where these facilities are built is also a very important factor in energy consumption. So as well as reducing total energy consumption, it matters what kind of energy these data centers are using. So when querying where your data is stored, these are some of the things that you need to be thinking about. So are they using hydroelectric, solar, wind power, for instance? They have a much smaller carbon footprint than power from fossil fuels like coal and natural gas. So my final point on data servers is very much audit where your data is stored. So that could also be understanding where the location is too, and decide if you can actually make this more sustainable for your business. So while we've put the context in place and while we've understood some of the areas that we could look at in terms of reducing digital waste, what are the actual benefits of being a sustainable business? So sustainable development is good for business, as you can see. Adopting a sustainable business model has many benefits, not least that there will be more resources available for future generations. But embedding sustainable measures into an organisation should increase productivity and reduce costs in the long run across both the supply and the value chains. The regulatory environment is and will continue to have an effect on business operations, and we're going to look at this in more detail shortly. Sustainability is also increasingly important for organisations looking for funding, so ESG, environment, social and governance. Investors are increasingly applying these non-financial factors as part of their analysis process to identify material risks and growth opportunities when considering investing in businesses who want to grow. So cost savings. Changing your current business model to one which is more sustainable does sound costly, but certainly cost savings is a key element for any business to stay profitable. But by applying a sustainable business model to business decision making, savings will be made, as reduced waste is a key factor in that. So for instance, adopting Zoom or Teams, like we've all done through COVID-19, reduces the need for travel, while collaborative file sharing platforms like Office 365 and Google reduces the need for paper and print and also storing of data. Reducing waste, whether that is process or physical, is also improving efficiency and productivity of your own organisation. Adopting a sustainable business model, I believe, also enhances product and service innovation, as companies are turning the process on its head and identifying products and services which will help to solve the global issues and meet the needs of tomorrow's customers, of which we'll talk about shortly. The byproduct, I believe, is also a more connected workforce and increased brand loyalty. So while keeping up with regulations may not be the most enjoyable part of running a company, it's critical. It's critically important to do so in order to keep on the right side of the law. But regulations are more than just policies, and they shouldn't be your only reason for wanting to become a sustainable and ethical business, but they are important. So for example, in a 2020 YouGov survey, the environment was ranked as the 4th most pressing issue facing business leaders, just below health, the economy and Brexit. Now, interestingly, the Climate Change Act in 2008 was made the UK the first country in the world to have a legally binding long-term framework to cut carbon emissions. One of the reasons why we hear a lot about climate change, net zero here in the UK. The government's 10-point plan covers a number of areas, including the pledge to achieve net zero carbon emissions by 2050, and also laying out the framework for green buildings, which will increase building standards to improve energy efficiency and low carbon heating, as well as launch a green purchasing policy framework. As part of the government's levelling up agenda, major procurement projects must now explicitly evaluate social value and not just consider it. So that includes supporting economies and communities to recover after COVID-19, tackling economic inactivity, but fighting climate change and reducing waste as well. If you're an exporter, policies and regulations are changing the world over. So Europe, for instance, are expanding the list of businesses who need to report on sustainability and who are encouraging all SMEs to do so. So being sustainable, looking at your waste and reducing that waste will lead to competitive advantages, but it has to be done in a genuine, authentic way. And also it needs to be reported so that your consumers and clients and stakeholders can see what you're actually doing. So touching on using sustainability for competitive advantage. Being sustainable is a key consideration for consumers in 2021. So 32% of consumers highly engaged with adopting a much more sustainable lifestyle. And equally important, 28% of consumers have stopped buying certain products due to ethical and environmental concerns. As this buying power shifts more towards Gen Zs and millennials, these consumers place a greater emphasis on ethical practices and sustainable efforts when making buying decisions. So when you're considering digital waste across your supply and value chains, you need to be keeping this in mind. And you need to be understanding how you can communicate those positive impacts back to your consumers. A study of 10,000 global consumers found that 91% of shoppers worldwide will likely switch to brands that support a local or environmental cause and that are also embedding those within their business practices. Another study showed that 90% of shoppers would boycott a company based on moral or irresponsible business practices. This demographic will research organisations' practices before purchasing products, so they will want to know how you manage your business. Due to the increasing amount of greenwashing among small and medium-sized organisations, they also want organisations to prove their sustainability claims. And they want organisations to track and publish this across their organisations. We have mentioned export markets, and certainly the work I've been doing with DIT and Innovate UK supports this shift to sustainable development and sustainable business models. And we certainly have been talking an awful lot about digital transformation and where digital comes into play. We'll get on to the supply chain next and talk about where digital waste can be identified. Excuse me. So digital and the IT waste in the supply chain. So we've already talked a little bit about content, email waste, but what about other waste in this supply chain? So we have to think about orders, for instance, something quite simple that happens on a day-to-day basis. All those corrections, updates, modifications to an order, they all have a CO2 impact. What about the use of simple data? Excuse me, such as alerts, alarms, and using dashboards with, say, 3 to 5 KPIs. Is it best to have a continuously updating dashboard, for instance, like you'll see with some companies have them on screen showing sales and so forth? Or is it better to have an update button when you need it? And yes, it is the latter. What about the use of AI in supply chains? Do you know the impact of training one AI model is energy intensive? So do you actually need AI? Is there a meaningful difference, a meaningful improvement in supply chain performance over the additional use of simple maths? Does it need to be that accurate? The difference in energy use from okay to perfection is like the shape of a hockey stick. And what about the companies in your supply chain? So if you're thinking about the buying behaviours of your consumers, those companies within your supply chain, are they concerned about digital waste? Are they considering best practice to minimise their own impacts? So an idea here is to conduct a value stream mapping exercise. And this will certainly let you identify where there is waste generally, but also where the digital and IT waste come into. As the awareness of sustainable practices continues to grow, leaders realise that sustainable innovations must extend outside of the immediate organisation. But we also need to make sure that we're communicating and collaborating effectively with our own teams as well. Brand reputation is another positive element in terms of being sustainable. And done well, being a sustainable business can enhance your brand reputation, but I do have a word of warning. As a brand and comms professionals, stats like this one, which shows that 45% of CEOs' driving force behind sustainability is based on brand management rather than value creation, does worry me. As we've got to wonder a little bit about the authenticity of these companies and their efforts. So it's not to say that brand reputation shouldn't be a consideration when being sustainable and putting sustainable activities within your organisation. But at the end of the day, as a business, we want to create value for our customers. And this in itself thus presents and positions our brand reputation on from this. So some top 10 tips in terms of how businesses can reduce their environmental waste. So as mentioned already, the starting point is very much to perform an IT and digital waste audit. So this means looking at your operations across your value and supply chains. Ensuring the digital infrastructure is set up correctly, so using Office 365, for instance. Ensuring content is stored once and data which is no longer used or relevant is actually deleted. Consider your existing products and services. Where can you innovate to reduce your carbon footprint? Create new products and services to help sustainable development, while bearing in mind any digital waste that this will produce. In your supply chain, support brands who are working towards a circular economy. Consider your own processes too to move into that space. Use renewable energy providers and buy hardware which incorporates renewable and recycled materials, but do your homework. If not already, consider moving to cloud-based servers, but again, check their energy provider. And are there any low carbon grant schemes in your area? Practically, be a conscious digital consumer and cut back on emails sent by the team. Also check the CO2 emissions from your website and what can you do to reduce that. Another one is go paperless, obviously. Now, an interesting fact about print. If it's longer than 4 pages and takes you more than 15 minutes, the maths works out that you should print it. However, our advice would be it's much more preferable to go into offline mode and read it there. And finally, switch off the devices. So an important part, if you're going to go down this line, is also about measuring your impact. And measuring your impact can have positive connotations for your own staff as well as your customers. Now, there are a lot of tools to measure impact, and deciding on which one is down to your exact needs will require some research from you. Costs vary and the robustness of data varies too. But tools like B Corp are well known. SDG Action Manager, it's a free version created by the UN and B Corp, and ISO offers a number of options from sustainability procurement to environmental assessments. In fact, ISO has part of its website devoted to the SDGs. So for instance, SDG 9, which we talked about earlier, has over 12,000 ISO standards to help meet that target. To learn more, I suggest going to the SDG Academy. They've got lots of free training to help you understand the subject. So a final thought on being sustainable and digital and IT waste. Digital waste doesn't have to undermine technology status as a force for good. I think it's important that we make it part of our daily business operations. But the key one that I want you to remember is I don't believe e-waste is pollution, or it is in fact even waste. It's actually a vital resource that we're only starting to value in full now. Does anybody have any questions for me? We have some time.
Thank you, Claire. I think there's a question from Ben in the chat box.
That's a very good question, Ben. I guess at the end of the day, if the storage is backed up on the cloud, I think we have to have faith, don't we, in where our content is being stored. So if it is being backed up on the cloud, and that we do have a good maintenance provider, then it's certainly, there's a possibility of content being lost. But I think at the end of the day, if we have it on the cloud, we're in a better position than having it on, say, 1, 2, or 3 different laptops. I hope that answers your question, Ben. Simon, how about you when you're considering your business and the CIC you're wanting to set up?
I've just, during your presentation, Claire, I just made a comment there that the Right to Repair Act that the government's going to, it's already live in the EU, but the government's going to bring it in the UK in the next, I think in the next year. That is going to dramatically reduce electronic waste.
Absolutely, and it will well position your company as well.
Exactly, yeah.
Are you communicating about that to your customers already?
We are. I'm a member of the charity repair as well, so we run repair workshops.
Excellent.
To push that across.
Excellent. And when it comes to hardware being recycled and reused, and creating new pieces of recycled hardware, do you get involved in that?
Not really, but it is something I would like to get involved in, because I think it makes more sense that the stuff we're putting back to our recycling partners is then reused in the manufacturing process again to make newer machines. It just makes sense.
Absolutely, absolutely. Fantastic. Is there anything else that you would like to ask? Or does that all make perfect sense? You're all going to go away and be SDG ambassadors.
Thank you, Claire. Just a message again from Ben to thank you for the answer that you gave to the question.
Lovely. No problems, Ben.
And a thumbs up and a round of applause as well.
Lovely, thanks, Ben.
Thank you very much, Ben. Okay, if there aren't any more questions, Simon and Ben, for Claire, I'd just like to take a couple of quick minutes from you to signpost you to further support that's available. And this is for businesses in the Humber region. So my name's Sadia, just to introduce myself. I work for a company called Winning Moves, and at the moment we're working with Kingston upon Hull City Council to deliver a project called Digital Catalyst. It's a programme that's free for businesses and provides one-to-one consultancy advice to them on various digital technology topics. So if there is anything that you have in mind already that you would like support on for your business, then we can proceed on that point. Or if you want somebody to come in to see where you might need digital technology support, then that can also be arranged. It's ERDF funded, so no cost at all to your business. It's just a time investment that would be required, and it's 12 hours of support. It's very impartial, so the advisors that we have, there's no sale involved or anything like that there. It's really doing what's best for your business, so it's very valuable support. I will send a copy of these slides, which have got details of how you can get in touch with us about that programme and find out more about it as well. But at the moment, I should mention that we're fully subscribed at the minute, but the reason we're promoting the programme is because there should hopefully be more places becoming available. So if you register your interest now, we have your details to hand to contact you as soon as that can happen. The other thing to mention is further ICT for growth events such as this one. So we have a programme that we'll be setting up for October. So that will become available on Eventbrite, and there is a link in these slides that I'll share with you on how you can register for upcoming events, find out more about them, etc. So we look forward to seeing you on more of these going forward. I'd also like to just say thank you to Claire for sharing all that knowledge with us, and we hope, Ben and Simon, that you found that very useful. If you do have any further questions for Claire, I'm sure she'll be happy to stay on for a few minutes if you want to post